Michael Kugelman is Deputy Director for the Wilson Center's Asia program. He joins us to talk about a move made by the Trump administration denying aid to Pakistan. Michael, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
Tell us about the Trump decision. What happened?
So essentially the Trump administration, or the State Department specifically, decided to freeze most security assistance to Pakistan. So it comes out to about $2 billion altogether. And this, in my view, had been something in the works for quite some time. I think from the time the administration took office, it was planning to freeze the aid, but I think that Trump's bizarre New Year's Day tweet in which he basically said it's time to freeze aid to Pakistan, I think that tweet made the administration move a bit more quickly than it was planning to.
So it flagged this move through criticism of how Pakistan handles terrorist groups within its own country.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the U.S. position, rightfully so in my view, has been that Pakistan has not done enough to crack down against terrorists on its soil that threaten and attack U.S. troops in Afghanistan. So specifically talking about terrorist groups like the Afghan Taliban and its very notorious faction called the Haqqani Network.
So you think the criticism is fair. Consequently, do you think the decision to freeze the aid is also the right decision?
Well, see, this is the thing. I think it's the right decision just because it's time to send a message of lack of satisfaction about Pakistan's not moving against these groups. But at the end of the day, the U.S. has done this many times before. The U.S. has frozen aid to Pakistan many times before. And did it lead to a change in Pakistani behavior? No. And so I don't see why you'd get a different result this time unless the aid freeze is just the first step of what could become a series of increasingly more punitive steps taken against Pakistan to try to put more pressure on it to act.
What has been the initial response from Pakistan on the freeze?
As you can expect, anger, a lot of angry words, a lot of angry rhetoric, and essentially Pakistan has said, you know, we don't need the aid, which is probably true. I mean, Pakistan.
Then why have we been giving it, and why have they been, if they don't need
Well, I mean, aid. The U.S. has believed that aid confers leverage. That if we provide all this money and all these weapons, it'll eventually get Pakistan to do what we want it to. Because if it doesn't, we'll take the aid away. It's a very misguided view, as I think is very clear. And so this is why I think that if the U.S. wants any chance of Pakistan acting in ways that the U.S. wants it to, it's going to need to do something a bit more stringent than a mere aid freeze.
So you're talking tough. What would be tougher measures, and what would Pakistan potentially respond to?
I mean, there are differing types of tougher measures. Many have already been out there in the open sourcing, so to speak. I mean, the U.S., for example, could expand its drone war deeper into Pakistan, going after terrorist leaders in areas that it hasn't done so before. And the U.S. could also revoke Pakistan's non-NATO ally status, which basically would make it impossible for Pakistan to get any type of military assistance from the U.S. That would be symbolic, given that there's already an aid freeze in place. The biggest sort of the so-called nuclear option is that the U.S. could designate Pakistan as a state sponsor of terror, and that would be a huge humiliation for Pakistan. But my view is that even if you raise the scale, if you ratchet up the pressure, if you try to tighten the screws, I still don't know if that would be enough because, you know, it's only natural when a country is threatened and pressured. Wouldn't it be more likely to double down and do even more of what it's already been doing as opposed to just, you know, caving?
Well, also talk about what Pakistan's motivations are in the first place. Why will they not challenge these groups in a more overt way?
I mean, I think it comes down to India, Pakistan's enemy. I mean, Pakistan views these groups as useful assets to push back, in the case of Afghanistan, to push back against the influence and presence of India in Afghanistan. India has a very close relationship with Afghanistan, provides a lot of development and economic support. It does not put boots on the ground by any means. Pakistan, though, fears that India will use Afghanistan as a staging ground for meddlesome acts, acts of sabotage, whatever the case may be, in Pakistan. So I think that Pakistan values its connections to these terror groups because it sees them as a useful asset to push back against this Indian presence. And India, it's obviously a more powerful country than Pakistan, so Pakistan needs to look at asymmetric tools to use, and it sees these non-state militant actors as, unfortunately, as one of these asymmetric tools.
And the third player in this scenario, the United States, isn't about to back down in its relationship with India.
No, not at all. In fact,
to satisfy Pakistan.
Not at all. And in fact, the U.S., what was very notable when President Trump announced his Afghanistan strategy in August of last year, he specifically called on India to step up its role and its presence in Afghanistan. that sent alarm bells sounding all over Pakistan. That really alarmed the Pakistanis because they felt that, you know, the Trump administration was giving India, or wanted to give India, carte blanche to essentially do whatever it wants to do in Afghanistan. Of course, that's not what the Trump administration meant, but that's how it was perceived in Pakistan. So absolutely, the U.S. is certainly not going to scale back on what is a rapidly expanding, deepening relationship with India.
So is there a solution? This sounds like the classic immovable object type scenario, diplomatically speaking.
Yeah, no, it's true. There are no easy solutions, and I think that, you know, what a lot of analysts, including myself, think is we need to figure out what the cost would need to be for Pakistan, where it no longer feels it's worthwhile to provide support to these militants. And I think that the cost would have to be very high. I mean, Pakistan is willing to withstand an aid freeze. It's probably willing to withstand many other forms of pressure. You know, honestly, I think short of some sort of miraculous outcome, like, you know, an India-Pakistan peace treaty, which is not going to happen, I just don't see Pakistan's calculus changing, even if the pressure is scaled up from the U.S. side.
So this is a chronic situation that we're just going to have to figure out how to live with.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, the question is, it's difficult. The U.S. is in a difficult spot now, knowing that Pakistan provides space to these terror groups that target U.S. forces in Afghanistan. But if you tried to tighten the screws, it could lead to bigger problems. I think that Pakistan could retaliate. That's an important factor. Pakistan could close down supply routes on its soil that are used by U.S. forces to access Afghanistan. If that happened, it would be devastating for a already difficult U.S. war effort in Afghanistan. The U.S. would need to look to alternate supply routes in Central Asia, which would be a lot more expensive and circuitous. And that's Russia's backyard. And you have to worry that Russia would try to hamper American access to those alternative routes.
Before we close, Michael, I want to move away from U.S. interests or Indian interests and just talk about Pakistan and how is the country doing independent of these particular situations?
I mean, it's actually experienced a lot of improvements. I mean, if you look at the numbers, terrorist violence, for example, has been reduced significantly over the last few years after a Pakistani counterterrorism offensive in the tribal areas, which is ironic. The U.S. claims Pakistan's not doing enough against terror. Pakistan will claim, well, in fact, terrorist numbers are down. And I think that says something to the disconnect in this relationship. You know, Pakistan feels it's done plenty going after the terrorists that threaten Pakistan the most, whereas the U.S. feels that the most dangerous terrorists are those that Pakistan has not done anything about, the likes of the Haqqani network.
How about economically and the political landscape?
Politics is a mess. The Prime Minister of Pakistan was essentially sent packing by the Supreme Court in Pakistan not too long ago on charges related to corruption, though many, including myself, think that the all-powerful Pakistani military may have had a hand in engineering sort of like a soft coup to get rid of a Prime Minister that it didn't like. And economically, things have improved. GDP numbers have increased somewhat incrementally. But I think the big question is if all this Chinese investment pouring into the country, $60 billion worth of infrastructure investments due to come in, if that will actually help address bigger economic concerns in Pakistan, like an energy crisis, bad roads, and that type of thing, or if it's wrong for Pakistan to put all of its economic eggs in one basket. And I think it is wrong to do that.
We're about to find out.
Indeed.
Michael, thank you. A fascinating overview of what's going on. Appreciate it.
Thanks.